Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Andrew Colombo-Dogavito, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Texas. I first want to say thank you to Dr. Weiler for inviting me to talk with you. Today, we will be talking about the seen and unseen impacts of ableism on society in a presentation that I've entitled, We Live in a Disabling Society: Artificial Limitations, Major Barriers, and Social Injustice in the U.S. as a Result of Ableism. The presentation will include discussion of the barriers and limitations for those with disabilities and the role that each of us plays in perpetuating this inequality. I'll first start off with a brief introduction about myself. As I mentioned, I'm an assistant professor of sport pedagogy and motor behavior here at UNT. I've been at UNT since 2017. Prior to that, I was at the University of Virginia, where I completed my doctoral studies in adapted physical education. At UNT, I also serve as Director of Physical Activity and Motor Skills Program, where we provide services to individuals with a variety of disabilities, including traumatic brain injury, autism, intellectual disabilities such as Down syndrome, ADHD, cerebral palsy, among others. And we're inclusive as possible and serve ages 3 to over 30. I serve as a faculty liaison for the Kristen Farmer Autism Center, and in this role I've collaborated with KFAC faculty to ensure appropriate motor skill instruction is provided to clients, and I have conducted trainings for staff and therapists about assessment and motor planning. I'm a former physical educator and I taught PK through 8th grade, water safety and physical education in both Michigan and Colorado prior to my PhD studies. I'm a radical pragmatic scholar, meaning I look for the practical solutions within issues that I research. Yet I hold no system as sacred. I predominantly focus on the physical activity experiences of disabled populations, and specifically the autistic individuals. And this includes investigating the systemic structures that prevent individuals and families from being physically active. I'm an avid mountain biker and climber and outdoor enthusiast, so when I'm not at work, you can usually find me outside. I also identify as disabled. I have ADHD and depression, both of which were not diagnosed until my late 20s during my PhD. The signs were there when I was younger, though I grew up in a household that did not recognize disability or saw it as a deficit. Mostly, though, I was able to cope during my primary years through my master's degree in a way that benefited my studies. Though ADHD comes with inattentiveness and hyperactivity, which can be a boon for productivity, it also comes with bouts of hyperfocus, which is great when it is about my work. It's not so much when I'm fixated on anything else. It's not uncommon for me to fall into 4-hour rabbit holes in some topic that captures my attention. My depression wreaks havoc most days on my productivity. When combined with ADHD, can cause bouts of insomnia, which, again, is great for when you need to pull an all-nighter, but not so much at pretty much any other time. It took me a long time to be okay with these parts of myself and come to terms with how they shape my day-to-day. Much of this was, despite my interest in working with disabled populations, due to the way the environment around me shaped my view of disability. It was a continuation of the unconscious propaganda that I was exposed to through the views of my parents and other adults, peers, and more broadly how society displayed disability. For today, we'll be covering what ableism is, the social model of disability, contribution of language, the empire of normal, inspiration porn, and who decides who is included. As we delve into ableism and its pervasiveness about society, I want you to center your thoughts in this moment about how you view disability. So before moving forward, I'd like you to take a quick minute, or as long as you need, to write down how you would describe disability. It can be in a sentence or just words. Maybe you want to describe a specific disability or just disability as a whole. Maybe you want to define what disability means to you, or how you see someone with a disability or what they are capable of. Make sure you write it down, because that makes it permanent in this moment. We'll refer back to it later, so you can pause this video if you need to. Okay, if you haven't written it down, pause it now, because we're going to move forward. So let's talk about disability. So according to the CDC, about 1/4 of the population in the US qualifies as having a disability. To put it a different way, that is about 61 million individuals, making it one of the largest minority categories in the US. When we look at how it breaks down, the majority of individuals will qualify as having a mobility impairment. So there's serious difficulties walking or climbing stairs, and they may use some type of mobility aid, like a wheelchair or a walker. The next category would be cognition. So individuals who might have difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. So this could be individuals who might have cognitive impairments or intellectual disabilities. It could also be individuals who might classify as having ADHD or other executive function issues. We break it down even further with independent living, hearing, vision, and self-care. As we look at how disability breaks down across ages, we see that individuals have a significantly greater likelihood of being disabled the older you are, to the point that individuals over the age of 75 have a significant increase in the likelihood of having at least one or more disabilities. So if you think about your grandparents, they may have hearing loss, visual impairments, mobility issues, or all of the above. And so if you are unaffected by disability now, or you don't have anyone in your immediate family who is, there's a high likelihood that you or someone you love will be within your lifetime. Now, before we go too much further, I want you to just quickly look back at your definition of disability and compare them to the following. So according to the World Health Organization, disability is an umbrella term for impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. It denotes negative aspects of the interaction between a person's health conditions and the individual's contextual factors, such as the environment and personal factors. According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, disability means, with respect to an individual, a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a record of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. So how does that match up with a definition or expression of disability that you have? Did you use similar words? Did you talk about the environment, or did you just talk about an individual's impairments? Did you conflate what a disability is and what an impairment is? That's okay if you did. You likely share your understanding of disability with many others, as you've been predominantly exposed to what is called the medical model of disability. Now, according to the medical model of disability, disability is defined by the impairment. It centers the individual as being, quote-unquote, of issue, or the problem, meaning that they need to be fixed or cured. So typically, if we're talking about the medical model, the difficulties come from the impairments, but are not the main cause of the problem. Typically, there are sensory or physical or mental impairments. The individual tends to be considered impaired, or they're a problem, or they're a deviant from the norm. Yet, this is changing. Another way we can look at it is the social model of disability. Now, impairments are still a part of this model, but it places the onus on society as being the root of the disabling conditions, and thus, it is the society's responsibility to be accessible. And so barriers for individuals can be derived from environment, attitudes, and organizations themselves. Now, the social model emerged from a disability advocacy movement, Nothing About Us Without Us, which led by disabled activists pushed for the civil rights to be included in society. Through occupying movements, marches, and sustained advocacy, they passed legislation like the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, the social model of disability was coined by Mike Oliver, who himself was a disabled activist and the first professor of what's now known as disability studies. This was put forth to counter the beliefs that were perpetuated by the medical model, though, in his own words, they were not meant to completely replace it. Within the social model, impairments exist, and the social model does not dispute that. It does not dispute that impairments can be painful, a struggle, and can cause issues to the person. But it reframes our conception about what disability is, and thus the expectation of those with disabilities. The social model is every bit as political as it is descriptive, meaning it describes how society disables individuals based on their impairments. It is also a call for action to society to change, to adjust, and to accommodate. As we further examine disability in society, it's important to recognize the views of others. We already noticed that is a potential disabling factor within the social model. In a 2018 report, Dixon, Smith, and Touche found that 2/3 of people would avoid someone with a disability for fear of doing or saying something wrong. In the same report, they showed that 1 in 3 people stated that they did not know someone with a disability, which, based on our understanding of disability in society, it's highly unlikely that that individual had not come across someone with a disability. And so it's likely that those who can present as able-bodied hid their disability around them. And when we consider the dominating views of society and how disability is viewed in society, it's not surprising that so many individuals might choose to hide disability. And if somebody doesn't know who is disabled, they may not know how to interact around them. And so they avoid them. Yet, when we don't know about something, that can lead to increased stereotype, discrimination, labeling, and stigma. Much in the way that other identities are stigmatized, so too are disabilities. Now, when referring to stigma, I mean that it refers to the attitudes and beliefs that lead people to reject, avoid, or fear those that they perceive as being different. Stigma is a Greek word that in its origins referred to a kind of mark that was cut or burned into the skin, which was usually used to identify people as criminals, slaves, or traitors, and those to be shunned. We no longer mark individuals with stigma, yet, even though we physically can't see it, stigma is carried around by every person of a group that is marginalized. When I talk about stereotyping, or stereotype, I'm talking about oversimplified generalizations about a group of people, which can be positive or negative beliefs that we hold about the group or characteristics of a social group. Stereotypes in and of themselves are not necessarily bad things, but they can lead to bad things if they're never confronted. When I talk about prejudice, which is built into this entire model, I'm talking about an unjustifiable negative attitude toward another group or toward the members of that group. And then when I talk about discrimination, I'm talking about the unjustified negative behaviors towards a group of members or outgroups based on their group membership. And so typically, our oversimplified generalizations of an individual, our stereotype of them, turns into a prejudice, some unjustifiable negative attitude. And that prejudice often leads to discrimination. And all of that is rooted in stigma. And stigma, however, is rooted in power, specifically an imbalance in power and oppression. So when we talk about disability and we talk about this imbalance of power, what we are talking about is ableism, the idea of discrimination in favor of able-bodied populations, or able-bodied people. It is a systemic issue. It occurs at the individual, cultural, and institutional level, much like racism or classism or sexism. Chodorov in 1999 described ableism as a permissible prejudice, i.e. one that is unacknowledged and even accepted in society. Individuals with disabilities are often burdens and parents pitied, so no one questions when an autistic adult or an adult with an intellectual disability is placed in a group home without their consent. We also don't question when disabled workers are paid less than $1 per hour, which is allowable by law for work peers are paid minimum wage or more. And we applaud when people criticize politicians we don't like when they have difficulty drinking water or walking down ramps instead of lambasting their failed policies. And we don't question when people use IQ to disparage individuals, when we know IQ is rooted in racism and eugenicism. Now, much like other forms of isms, ableism is pervasive and is perpetuated by how we talk or refer to individuals with disabilities. Yet, we also must recognize that these things are not equatable, suggesting one's experience of racism or ableism as something else diminishes that experience. Additionally, we must recognize that the intersectionality of disability and other identities and the layers of oppression that can be experienced. For example, a Black disabled woman who identifies as queer has multiple levels and multiple intersectional identities that can increase the oppression that individual faces throughout their daily life. Pushing a little bit further into what ableism is it is that set of beliefs or practices that devalue and discriminate against people with physical, intellectual, or psychiatric disabilities. And it often rests on the assumption that disabled people need to be fixed, or that individuals are unable or they lack skill. And it, unfortunately, is interwoven into our culture. Due to many limiting beliefs about what disability does or does not mean, how able-bodied people learn and treat people with disabilities, and how people with disabilities are often not included at the table for key decisions. Ableism is a means to devalue those with disabilities, and it's interwoven into the bedrock of our society. Like most forms of discrimination, ableism often shows its ugly face from non-disabled or able-bodied populations, even if they have good intentions. And ableism, like other isms, is based in the idea of privilege. Who is allowed to do what and when? It is important to recognize that disability cuts across all other identities. Age, gender, sexual orientation, class, education level, you name it. Yet systematically, disabled populations, like others, have been excluded from society. People push individuals off and ignore their needs, their human needs. We often call these special because that means they're exceptional, uncommon, and not normative, so we can ignore them. And oftentimes, individuals feel like they can only have conversations with their own spaces. Yet there's a renewed push from disabled activists in order to make sure those conversations are had in the broader context of modern society. And from this quote from Mia Mingus, from Disabled Justice is simply another term for love. They mention it should not be that we have to leave mainstream disability spaces or even alternative disability spaces to be able to be fully ourselves and have whole conversations about our own lives. It shouldn't be that we have to leave racial justice and people of color spaces to be able to fully name and examine how ableist supremacy and white supremacy work hand in hand to oppress and target disabled people of color and all people of color at large. It shouldn't be that we have to leave queer and feminist spaces to be able to talk about how gender oppression and ableism have deeply intertwined roots. And why is it just as important to abolish the gender binary as it is to abolish ableist supremacy? And to push this even further, considering the current pandemic and civil unrest, disabled people are often an afterthought, especially with our own healthcare systems. In fact, disabled populations have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and police brutality. Yet social media spaces are a space where individuals are able to share and find community, and they're able to express themselves in a platform where people actually may listen instead of just being dismissed outright. So now that we've talked about how ableism exists and is perpetuated, and is built into the society. Let's talk about how we actually counter ableism. And it's pretty simple. I'm going to give you two basic approaches. The first is to recognize stigma and the misconceptions about disability. This comes from learning about disability. This comes about learning about generalizations and stereotypes and recognizing when you hear them. Because oftentimes, these things may not be confronted in somebody's experience, so they may continue to perpetuate a stigma that doesn't exist. And so if you know something doesn't sound right, say something about it. That's the only way we can combat the misconceptions that surround disability. The second thing is understand how ableism operates and work to revalue, engage, difference, and disability. So as we think about the civil unrest that's going on in society and the real work that people are having to do surrounding racial injustice, so too can we look at disability injustice and how ableism has played a role in that. So far, the presentation has given you a glimpse about the negative aspects and impacts of ableism. Ableism, according to Lydia Brown, relies and is dependent on every other form of ism. So if we are to seek to eradicate racism, sexism, ageism, classism, ableism, we must also address the systematic oppression of disabled people. Which brings me to my next point. Language matters. It matters because it perpetuates stigma. As we look at how a humanist perspective might define disability or refer to individuals with a disability, they tend to center the person, to center the human. And so they would refer to somebody with a disability as a person with a disability, a person with autism, a person with a hearing impairment. Yet, posthumanism suggests that labels are fluid. And according to some activists in the disabled community, they prefer identity first. So, an autistic person or a disabled individual, as they do not view the disability as separate, but a part of their daily life that influences and can't be distinguished or segmented. It's important to recognize that many activists also believe that by separating the person, by using person-first language, that is accidentally putting a negative connotation on disability. Disability is something that has to be separated, therefore it must be negative. But for some individuals, the disabling part of their life, the disability itself, is not necessarily the bad thing. The impairments are pretty awful. They can be. They can make life a little bit harder. But the thing that makes things really hard is when society does not accommodate for individuals. It's important to recognize that language is a very dynamic area and language rules are constantly changing. And so it's important to use the language of the person and to not correct them. It's also important to consider how we refer to those with disabilities. So I'm sure many of you have come across each of these different terms. Special, or disabled, or differently abled, or learning differences, or just different. They are all synonyms for disability. Yet people use them to avoid saying disabled, because disabled in our society is considered bad. Yet, to this point, we've learned that disability itself is not bad. It's part of the human condition. 1/3 of U.S. adults have, 1/4 of U.S. adults have a disability in some form. How we view disability, on the other hand, is bad. Therefore, because we can't rationalize disability and we can't consider it a part of the human condition, we dance around the term and we use language like special or different or differently abled. And as I mentioned before, disabled people's needs aren't any different, and they certainly aren't special. When we use special, it's to suggest that they're extra, that they're not just something that we should do, so we don't have to deal with them because they're special. I'm sure you've also heard or seen, or maybe some of you have used the language like this before. He suffers, she's afflicted, they are a victim. Again, we're stigmatizing the disability. We should rephrase this by saying, he suffers from an inaccessible environment. She is afflicted by the negative views of others. They are victims of ableism. When we push the stigma away from disability and we focus on the barriers that individuals face, it becomes less about the individual and the issues that they may face. And it's a realization that it's society that is disabling, and it's a society that is causing the issues. Now yet, it doesn't take much to become a compassionate ally. And in fact, many of you will work at some point in your career, either with someone as a disability as a colleague, or either with a client or an individual who is disabled. And so here's just a little helper to get you there.
Good morning, Bob.
Morning there, big man. Morning, Alice!
There's no need to be awkward.
Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention!
Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, ah! Oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
What?
Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't underestimate me just because I have a great smile.
Just because I'm blind
May I help you?
does not mean I'm deaf.
I don't know. I think he said he was gonna come, but... Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath. Relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi, would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Alice.
Morning.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
There's no need to be awkward.
So just to reiterate, when we're interacting with disabled people, you want to speak directly to the person with the disability. That means even if they have an interpreter, you're talking to them. If they have an aide with them or their spouse and you want to talk with them, don't ignore them. Adults with disabilities are adults and deserve to be treated as such. If you are unsure of how to interact with an individual, just ask. A person's mobility equipment, such as a wheelchair or scooter or cane, can be a part of their personal space, so don't just assume you can touch it. Listen attentively when you're talking to a person who has difficulty speaking. People who have psychiatric disabilities may have varying personalities and a different way to cope with their disability. So don't assume just because you've met one person with that type of disability that you know how they're going to react. There are visible disabilities as well as invisible disabilities, meaning not all disabilities are apparent. If you met me on the street, you wouldn't know that I had a disability. And please note, it's considered offensive to pretend to have a disability. So no matter what social media trend is going on, make sure you avoid those. They're traps. So in your text, it describes what's considered the empire of the normal. Within this empire, it centers the experiences of able-bodied populations and considers disability to be deviant from that norm. So we see it in our magazines, we see it in advertising and television channels, and we see it in our sporting events. To be fit, skinny, healthy, usually white, and able-bodied is to be attractive and to be sought after. Those with disabilities are rare in any of the marketing or any of our advertising or in our magazines or even characters on shows. But it's changing, slowly. I want you to think about the magazines you read and the shows you watch. How many disabled characters are there? How many of those actors are actually disabled themselves? Now consider the sporting world. How many disabled athletes can you name? How many disabled sports? How many of you know when the Paralympics occur? When we lack these narratives, we lack representation. The identity of disabled athletes becomes centered around their impairment, and their story becomes one of overcoming rather than of practice and ability. And like I mentioned, this is changing, but slowly. More and more representation is occurring through advertising, in toys, and in TV shows. We're starting to normalize these experiences as part of who we are as humans, not something that needs to be hidden or needs to be fixed. So you can see in the example of Tommy Hilfiger and making adaptable clothing for individuals with a variety of disabilities. You can see it in toys like Barbie and shows on Netflix that actually include disabled actors as a part of main roles, not just side characters or for comedic relief. Yet, we also have pervasive imagery that stigmatizes disability. I'm sure many of you have seen images like these. These are referred to as inspiration porn. This term was first used by a disabled activist, Stella Young. Stella used the word porn very deliberately, as pornography operates by objectifying one group of people for the consumption and pleasure of another. These images are meant to make you feel better about yourself, that it could always be worse. You don't have a disability, so what's your excuse? When we share these images or allow them to persist without confrontation, we perpetuate stigma against disability. We continue to leverage ableism to keep our able-bodied selves in a better state, higher in the social hierarchy. Though seemingly innocuous imagery, we allow the oppression of disabled people to continue. Which brings me to my last point. Who decides who is included? In considering physical activity or sports, how do we decide who can be included? What do able-bodied people get to decide? In many ways, physical activity or sport can be a potential way to break through the empire of the normal. Sport itself has never been apolitical. It has served as a cultural beacon to signal change. Look at the impact that Billie Jean King had for women's equality, this leading to the eventual signing of legislation that included Title IX mandating that equal opportunities be given to men and women. Look at the importance of the salute that Johnny Smith and John Carlos did by holding up a fist during the medal ceremony of 1968 in the Olympic Games to advocate for human equality. Look at the power of athletes who come out or identify as gay or queer, and what that means for the next generation of individuals. And look to the example of Colin Kaepernick and its direct connection to the events of today. Sports and activity have the ability to shift cultural change and to move the normal, to expand it, and more importantly, to dismantle it, so that we are more in an equal and just world. Now, it's also important to highlight that competitive sport might not be the best for everyone. It might not be the most accessible. What we should work toward is ensuring that individuals can engage in lifetime physical activity and fitness, activities that they can do independently and give them a sense of purpose and drive. I'm sure many of you go for workouts when you're feeling down, or when you need motivation, or you're just feeling stuck, or to just feel better. Individuals with disabilities have that right too. And when we consider sport, however, it is a great exposure for individuals with disabilities and to demonstrate the value to non-disabled populations. Yet, how do we contend with the stigma that is continued to perpetuate? More representation helps. Examples like the Paralympics, which occur every 4 years, 2 weeks after the Olympic Games, can help put disabled people in the spotlight and demonstrate that disability is not the only thing that defines them. The Paralympics itself was a radical move. It actually was scheduled at the same time during the 1948 Olympic Games, in direct conflict. And it put disabled athletes and disabled sports in proximity with what many still consider the height of athletic achievement. Yet in the over 50 years since its creation, the media and much of society still perpetuates stigma around disability. It can be patronizing, it can be inspirational, and it can cause curiosity in a negative way. In a co-authored paper, I, along with Dr. Weiler and Dr. Everbach from the Department of Journalism, examined how the portrayals from the last Paralympic Winter Games from 2018 were done around gender and disability. And talking about disability specifically, we found, much like the prior evidence, that athletes with disabilities were framed still as overcoming their impairments or were less than their able-bodied peers. And these can be seen in the two quotes here. So in considering a frame of overcoming, one of the news anchors was heard saying, Japanese skier Hiraku Masawa is a one-leg amputee from a road accident when he was just 6 years old. The announcer added, he had time to work with his impairment and go about adapting. This framing that the impairment was something to overcome repeatedly emerged. Additionally, announcers made disabled athletes out to be less than their able-bodied peers. For example, several announcers applauded athletes for just getting to the bottom of the hill. Or they may have said remarks that were very unlikely to hear during an able-bodied skiing competition, such as, getting to the bottom and finishing on the opening day is sometimes more of an achievement to some of these athletes than going for the medals. We also found that disabled female athletes have to contend with dual oppressions, the idea of intersectionality, so having to deal with ableism as well as the everyday run-of-the-mill sexism that still is pervasive in sports. So again, how do we consider who is included and excluded? Who has the power to make these decisions? As I hope I've shown through this presentation, that determination is made by our words and our actions. It can be subtle and even unintended, yet it refers to the power dynamic in who belongs. When we consider the empire of the normal, sport can be a powerful thing in shifting the paradigm, yet it's not the only determining factor. A critical mass of society is needed to overcome the ingrained stigma that is still pervasive. We need to combat ableist ideas about who belongs where and just how much we need to accommodate. When we consider sports and games, rules are not sacred. They can be changed and they can be adapted. They're only sacred if we allow them to be. The amount of space we allow disabled athletes is entirely determined by our willingness to live in a more just society that is more accessible. Disabled people have a right to try anything their able-bodied peers have to try. And who are we, and I'm talking about the royal we, society, who are we to stop or prevent that? And we start by adapting our own perceptions. We have to examine the beliefs we have about disability and question how we learn them and how we perpetuate them. It starts by recognizing that we don't have any idea what people are capable of, especially people with disabilities. And we don't have the power or the right to make any determination about what they can or can't do. And in fact, whenever you meet someone, the first thing you can do is presume competence. Presume that they can do whatever it is you think they can or can't do. And I want to play this last video here as just an example of how, when given the appropriate accommodations, how powerful it can be to be included in physical activity and in sport.
Kayaking a river like this as a blind person is a really different experience. You're running down through the canyons and you just hear the roar and the rage of the rapids as you're getting close to them. It's like, well, I can't see it. But okay, that one's gonna be big. Yeah, that one's gonna be real big.
Keep coming right.
The Grand Canyon is the ultimate kayaking expedition. It's 12 days, 226 miles, tons of white water.
This is the first time 5 blinded vets are kayaking down the Grand Canyon.
I stare into a still, dark world, and that can make you want to be stagnant. And it's not what I want to be. I want to move.
We developed this simple system for kayaking blind.
My primary guide leading me is creating this verbal reference point.
Whatever noise I make, they try to follow me. Essentially, I am a homing beacon.
The guides are veterans as well, so you have that camaraderie. I'm helping other veterans achieve something, and that's like therapy for me.
Nobody comes home from more of the same. We have physical wounds in this group, but mental wounds as well. We're all healing together. You know, compassion's there. People are here for you.
Being in the Grand Canyon is just a moment to absorb and feel where you are.
Feels like the river.
We have friends telling us about the geology and the various colors.
Stigma pie.
Touch the canyon wall.
There it is. God.
I told him to tell me not what he sees, but what he feels.
So cool.
He told me he felt insignificant. I knew immediately what he was seeing.
As you journey down the river, the rapids in the Grand Canyon just get more and more intense. It can be absolutely terrifying.
You have to work through this thing in your head where you're going to submit yourself to going through this rapid.
In the military, your life depended on those people around you. And that extends out here.
A little bit more left.
You're putting your lives in their hands once again, and they got you.
There you go. Little bit, little bit. Right here, right here. Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy. There you go. Right there you go. Right there you
When I lost my vision, I had no idea what a blind person could do. I was the first blind person I met.
Oh, you got it. Can I get a hug, Lonnie?
Being able to find not just a sport, but a community of other veterans was life-changing.
I am hoping that others realize that what's within them is bigger than their limitation.
When you come out here and you kayak a river like this and work as a team, you tap into that resilience and that courage that exists within you.
Just gives you this sense of belonging. Makes you believe that you can do anything.
So as you can see, through pretty simplistic modification and teamwork, those blind kayakers were able to go down one of the most iconic rivers in the world. They were allowed to experience that space. They were able to find joy of being in a space that made them feel insignificant, even though they necessarily couldn't experience it visually. Why would any of us want to prevent that? You also see in this clip the power that sport and activity has to empower people and to bring people into a community. One of the kayakers said that he was the only blind person that he knew. There was no way for him to know what he was capable of or even how to navigate his daily life, because we are bombarded with the idea that if we become disabled ourselves, our life is over. But clearly it's not. In quoting Mark Zupan, Paralympic gold medalist in wheelchair rugby, he said, "I've done more in a chair than I ever did able-bodied." Impairments exist. Many of them suck, and they can make life hard. But what really sucks is trying to overcome the societal barriers that limit the excellence of disabled people. What sucks is the perpetuation of ableist beliefs that influence disabled people as well as able-bodied people. And I want to leave you today with a quote from Mir Stevens. Fundamentally, to the disability rights movement is the understanding that we live in a disabled society. The artificial limitations born of injustice present the major barriers in lives of people with disabilities, not an individual's impairments. Disability is not a pitiable medical state. It is a set of social barriers that can be fought and overcome. And I'd like you to revisit your paper that holds your thoughts of disabilities. How have they changed? How might your views be different now? I hope now, with a broader understanding, you can continue what you have learned here and continue to help dismantle the ableism and stigma in society whenever you encounter it. As I mentioned before, all ableism, racism, sexism, every other ism are all intertwined, and we cannot dismantle any of them without tackling all of them. And as recent protests have shown, there's power in lots of people doing really small acts. They add up. So please, add to it. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me at the email or find me on social media.